Welcome to the third edition of Lokad Supply Chain Debates. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting a debate, much anticipated in fact, between Jeff Baker and Joannes Vermorel. Jeff teaches supply chain dynamics at the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics and is founder and managing director at Libre SCM. Meanwhile, to my left, Joannes is the founder and CEO of Lokad. He's an engineer with the Corps de Mille France and taught software engineering at École Normale Supérieure for 6 years. Now, the topic of today's debate is forecast value added, or FVA, a best practice or a time waster? Jeff will argue that FVA is in fact best practice, while Joannes will argue it's a waste of time. Now, as quickly as possible, I will try to get through the parameters of the debate, the housekeeping, so that we can get to the good stuff. So first, there will be opening remarks, maximum 7 minutes each. As agreed ahead of time, Joannes will speak first. Then each speaker will have a 5-minute rebuttal. This will be followed by a 2-minute conclusion from each speaker, at which point I will pose some follow-up questions. These questions can be submitted by viewers at any time during the event in the live chat. Now, in preparation for the debate, both speakers agreed to the following definition. So, forecast value added, FVA, is a simple tool for evaluating the performance of each step and contributor in a forecasting process. Its goal is to eliminate waste by removing processes and activities of any kind that fail to increase forecast accuracy or reduce bias. Now, that definition, as well as full bios for both speakers, are in a Google document, an open Google document that you can find in the comments section, or the comment chat for this video. Now, during the debate section, I will strictly time both speakers, and I will politely remind them when they're running out of time with a modest throat clear at best. But I do recommend that each person times themselves so you know when time is running out. Almost done. Speakers are to remain completely silent during each person's turn, so please don't interrupt each other, at least not during the timed section. And lastly, some shameless self-promotion while you're here. If you enjoy these debates and you like what we do, I encourage you to subscribe to Lokad's YouTube channel and to follow us on LinkedIn. And with that, is forecast value added a best practice or a waste of time? Joannes, please, your opening remarks.
First, I would like to thank Jeff for being a good sport and agreeing to this debate. In simple terms, FVA is a tool for tracking accuracy increases and decreases. Now, is FVA a best practice? For anything to be considered a best practice, it must, by definition, reflect the community's understanding of what is the most effective way to achieve a particular goal. However, forecasting is not a goal in and of itself, nor does it happen in a vacuum. It is a tool that we use to accomplish a specific goal. Some may argue that the goal of forecasting is to greater accuracy. This is a heavily disputed position. In my opinion, forecasting is just one more tool that helps us to make better business decisions. That is a business decision that makes more money. So the question is, does FVA, by measuring accuracy or which overrides increase or decrease, measuring the impact of increase or decrease on accuracy of overrides, does this move us closer to accomplishing the goal of making more money? I am not convinced. And for now, I will present 3 criticisms to support my case. First, even though FVA was not originally designed to facilitate collaborative forecasting, FVA does, by design, provide a framework for measuring the accuracy impact of collaborative forecasting. This is important. FVA doesn't say you should use the best forecasting practices. FVA does say, here is the accuracy impact of whatever you are doing. Why is this important? Well, what is the best practice in the forecasting community? Since the 80s, Spiros Makedakis has organized a series of public forecasting competitions to find those best practices. Since the M4 in 2018, those competitions have consistently demonstrated the superiority of algorithmic methods. In fact, probably the greatest expert alive when it comes to human forecasting capabilities, Philip Tetlock wrote that whenever a forecasting algorithm is available, this algorithm must be used. The reason? The algorithm invariably delivers superior accuracy compared to human judgment. This algorithm, and obviously the expert using it, is the best practice. So if collaborative forecasting and manual overrides are not the best practice, and demonstrably they are not, then companies measuring them with FVA is also not best practice. And I would argue a waste of time. Some might say, but Joannes, FVA does not explicitly advocate collaborative forecasting or manual overrides. Okay, but that is how it is popularly used, even in Jeff's writings. However, my second criticism is something FVA is built on, and that is the time series perspective. FVA requires classic time series forecast, also known as point forecast. At minimum, FVA advocates using a naive forecast, just a copy of the last actual as a baseline for comparing the forecasting overrides. This no change forecast is a time series. But is time series a best practice? Again, no. Point forecasts aren't just incomplete forecasting tool. They can be downright misleading, for example, in scenarios of high variance. This is because point forecasts don't factor uncertainty. In fact, the M5 forecasting competition included a separate challenge, the uncertainty challenge, that focused on quantile predictions, which Lokad entered and won at the skill level, by the way. In reality, a much better class of forecast already exists, and that is probabilistic forecast. Unlike time series, probabilistic forecast, we don't single out a single possible future, for example, demand next week. Instead, we look at all possible futures and their respective probabilities. Why is it important? It's important because identifying all the possible future scenarios is essential for selecting the best possible choice. This is important whenever financial risks are involved, which happens to be all the time as far as supply chains are concerned. However, FVA is not compatible with probabilistic forecasting. Why? Because probabilistic forecasting means looking at probability distributions and not time series. And let's be real, people in sales and marketing are not going to manually edit probability distributions with or without FVA. That's an absolute non-starter. Thus, if time series are not best practice, and they certainly are not when it comes to risk management, FVA using them to compare accuracy overrides is also not best practice. I would argue it's a waste of time. My third criticism is that forecast value added does not measure value. It measures accuracy. And does accuracy add value? Not necessarily. A more accurate forecast does not in and of itself add value. In many real-world situations, a 90% accurate forecast and a 60% accurate forecast leads to the very same inventory decisions if MOQs or other constraints are present. If the decision financial outcome don't change, then measuring the accuracy gain do not add business value. As such, from a business perspective, it is absolutely incorrect to say that accuracy in and of itself adds value. If it is the case, and it is the case, how can focusing on accuracy with FVA be the best practice? It isn't. Even if you don't personally use FVA to support collaborative forecasting, others do. FVA is still on time series forecast, which ignores uncertainty, and also the idea that increased accuracy equals increased value, which defy business settings, actually. And all of these are all bad practices, and therefore I argue that FVA itself cannot be best practice. It is, in my humble opinion, a waste of time. Thank you.
You still have 15 seconds, Joannes. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Joannes, for your opening remarks. Jeff, at this time, I invite you to please make your opening remarks.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Conor. Thank you, Joannes. I really appreciate the opportunity to get here and engage in this conversation. So obviously, I'm for the use of FVA as a best practice. This comes from the fact that all supply chains need to plan, right? We need to make decisions far in advance. So maybe 2 to 3 months to set a manufacturing schedule to collaborate with suppliers. Maybe set it 6 months ahead. We need a good forecast to make sure, if we've got small capacity changes, maybe staffing, maybe a co-manufacturer we want to bring on. So we have to make these decisions on a long time frame, and we do end up revisiting those, right? And so, I've got a couple favorite quotes in supply chain. One is, the plan is nothing, but planning is everything. So we need to have this plan to get us in the right position. Now, my second favorite quote in supply chain is from Mike Tyson: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So it points to the fact that we know we're going to take some rocks in supply chain. The goal is to make the best decision possible with the greatest chance of success in the executional space. The best way to do that is to engage our functional experts, sales and marketing. They have valuable insights that can be used to improve the forecast, therefore should be included in the consensus process, because engaging those experts in a structured fashion gives us the better data we need to make better decisions, right? And FVA is an effective tool to measure the effectiveness of those inputs. Now, the caveat being is, yes, you could potentially open the door for bias, but from my perspective, what we need to do is work on correcting that bias, not eliminating them entirely, okay? So we have to be cross-functional. Like we've been preaching that cross-functionality is the way to go for many, many years now. I don't want to go back to a functional silo where only one person, everyone's only responsible for their own decision and not for their impacts with others. So to do this best, one, I think you have to have guided adjustments. Again, where FVA shines is, give me those products that are highly valuable but have a high error. Okay, that's the fertile ground to go looking for the better inputs there. Also, if I've got a large impact that's expected, some material adverse effect that's coming in, or it could be a positive effect as well, we need to be able to plan for those. So first thing is, those adjustments should be guided. The thesis I did for my master's degree said, hey, we need to look at maybe the direction of the adjustment. Is it up or is it down? What's the inherent forecastability of the time series? What is the size of the override? And let's make sure that if we're going to add value, that we're looking for a substantial increase. We're not just tweaking things, right? And so the guided is one. Next is it's structured, right? I'm not going to let anyone from sales or marketing just give me an arbitrary number. I'm going to ask, what are their input assumptions? Is this based on new data that we haven't even modeled yet? Then I'm going to dig deeper a little bit, go, okay, is this a best case scenario? Is it a worst case scenario? What's the most likely case? What would have to happen? What would have to be true for this scenario in the future to take hold, right? So in that way, what we're trying to do is proactively root out causes of bias and understand the motivations behind that. So once we do that, then yes, next month we look at those adjustments to say, hey, did it add value or did it not add value? What I like to say is, good judgment's based on experience. Experience is based on bad judgment. So we learn from our mistakes, right? We tie back to the assumptions, we validate. We might find something that, hey, you know what? Maybe the salespeople are constantly over forecasting because they don't have trust in supply chain. What's a bias? That's a trust issue. We can start to address that. Furthermore, they are the ones that contextualize that information better than we can. I don't think we're going to have someone, a supply chain scientist who's going to be the expert in all the nuances of marketing or all the nuances of forecasting. I'm going to rely on those experts, use them to give me that data. Now, if over a series of time, I find those inputs to be valuable, I'm going to try to automate them. I've got no argument against automation about collecting that right data, but the problem is, we don't live in a world with infinite pure data, right? If there is manufacturing data, if there is sales data, if there is marketing data, oftentimes we have to proactively go out and seek that out, okay? So if we do that well, there may be a lot of these decisions we can automate. So totally aligned with that. Also, adjustments aren't required. Just because we have an FVA process and a forecasting system doesn't mean we have to touch it. In fact, the number one forecasting mantra ought to be do no harm. Kraft Heinz, which is one of the largest, food and beverage, companies in North America, has a metric said low touch forecasting percent. Like, how do I make sure that I'm not touching it every single time, right? I think Deming said it best. Deming said, don't just do something, stand there. Right? Because he realizes the natural tendency of someone, okay, they're looking for me to make an input. I better make an input to show that I'm busy. No, that's totally the wrong way to look at it. And as as we look at proof that error reduction is valuable, we can point to the Institute for Business Forecast and Planning, did a survey of 8 CPG companies and found out that for a 1% reduction in forecast error, I'm going to get $1.7 million of benefit for $1 million revenue from avoiding the cost of over forecasting, right? So I'm avoiding the discounts, I'm avoiding transshipments, obsolete products, excess inventory, and tying up working capital. I'm also going to reduce the cost of under forecasting by about $1 million per billion of revenue. So I'm avoiding lost sales. I'm avoiding case fill fines. Some of our bigger companies will fine you if you're not on time in full. And oftentimes we jump through a lot of hoops to do that. We'll increase production costs, increase expedited shipment costs. So there is value. So IBF has seen that in their research. Gartner has also found similar types of benefits where 2 to 7% reduction in inventory value, 4 to 9% decrease in obsolete inventory, 3 to 9% reduction in transportation costs. So there is quite a bit of data out there that says, if we can increase forecast accuracy, we're going to be better off. So the magnitude of these numbers makes it attractive to pursue avenues towards improving forecast accuracy, especially in the areas where I've got an item that's high value and high error, or if I know ahead of time there are going to be external events that are going to impact my supply chain one way or another. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. You also still have 15 seconds if you'd like.
I have 13, but I'm good.
Right. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for your opening statement. At this point, we shall proceed to the rebuttals. Joannes, 5 minutes when you are ready.
Thank you, Jeff, for your opening remarks. I think you argue your position very well, though I think there are a few points that I would like to clarify. I'm not challenging, the intent that people are trying to do something good for the company. I am trying to challenge the reality of the real outcome. And here, so first, if we think that accuracy is best, it's something that you worth chasing, then the reality, as I pointed out in my initial statement, was that those FVA do not reflect the forecasting best practices. So if a company is truly chasing accuracy, then by just not doing those collaborative forecasts, they will actually get more accurate results. That's unfortunately, what has been empirically demonstrated. And then the second problem is that the overrides themselves, are a very, very bureaucratic way to approach the problem. And as soon as you put a mechanism, you say people do not do harm. Yes, but if you put a bureaucratic mechanism in place, this thing will be used. It's if you have, because FVA implies setting up like a mini bureaucracy or mini technocracy, because there is, I would say, software elements involved. And it will be used, and there will be people who will be checking whether people in sales and marketing are indeed actually using, making the corrections and everything. And so for me, it paves the way for something that will generate a lot of bureaucratic busy work, because the reality is that when you start looking at what those forecasts and adjustment look like, we're talking of tens of thousands of time series, each time series having like 50 points or more. Weekly forecast, one year ahead. But that leads me, to another criticism is that by focusing on accuracy in isolation, I believe that FVA misallocate money and blinds company to much more effective ways that people could contribute to the forecasting process. And to be perfectly clear, I've never argued that members of sales, marketing, and finance could not contribute meaningfully to the forecasting process. I am perfectly aware that any relevant member of staff can hold valuable information in their head, information that could provide financially rewarding to the company. However, what I disagree with is the idea that people should wait until after a point forecast is produced to then manipulate it with manual overrides in order to increase accuracy. That this, as I said, is not best forecasting practices, and yet it is what people usually do with FVA. However, there is a constructive way to involve people in the forecasting process, it is by contributing to the forecasting algorithms that generate the forecast and later other algorithms that generate decisions. In reality, this means assisting the forecasting expert, at Lokad this would be a supply chain scientist, in writing and refining this algorithm by providing domain expertise and insights. This doesn't mean that everyone in sales and marketing has to read probability distributions and write scripts in Python. Instead, they help by providing the forecasting expert with the actionable insights that might be useful. And then the expert translates those insights into the lines of code. And finally, the automated algorithm run and generate the forecast. At the end of the day, those insights are just pieces of information, and they are distributed, I agree, everywhere in the company. However, the forecasting expert is the person who knows how to translate all of this into a meaningful forecast and a sensible set of supply chain decisions. Tons of excellent data but can be available, but it's the forecasting expert, and this expert only, who should decide how this data should be used to produce or revise a forecast. This is the best practice supported by decades of experimental forecasting results. And unfortunately, FVA has no place in this arrangement. By measuring accuracy instead of directly contributing to the improvement of the forecasting algorithm, the kindest thing that you can say is that FVA is a distraction. I, however, would call it a waste of time. Thank you.
Joannes, you still have 20 more seconds.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, at this moment, I see you smiling. Feel free to respond with your 5-minute rebuttal. I think you are muted, by the way.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, no, interesting perspective. I want to reflect back on a couple things. One, we talked about you mentioned the M5 competition in MicroMasters. One thing I would like to point out is that 92% of those people lost to a very simple exponential smoothing algorithm benchmark. So there's an argument for simplicity. So there's a difference, I think, between best practice and bleeding edge. I want to make sure we have a distinction there, because we have a lot of times where simpler actually is better. It is more acceptable to the people that use it. I know from an explainability standpoint, if we are in an S&op meeting in a demand review, it's a lot easier to explain how that's coming and more buy-in to that. So it's one thing. The other one you mentioned about time series, focusing on just a point, it is a best practice to not only give the time series, but also, what the prediction intervals are going to be, right? And that does tie into the accuracy. So yes, a best practice can be time series plus relaying onto the people what are the prediction intervals around that. So we're in agreement that a point forecast is a piece of information. A point forecast plus the prediction intervals is more valuable. You mentioned that the probabilistic forecasts, aren't amenable to FVA. I think if you look at one of the recent issues of Foresight, you'll see an article by Stephen de Cook about probabilistic forecasting and a variant of this, stochastic value added, which I think points to the value of this framework. Is I'm somewhat agnostic to my forecasting. However I do it, I want to look at an improvement as I add different inputs into my forecast. How am I improving it? Then also making sure, one argument is, okay, we've got to make sure that we have an efficient, effective use of our resources, and that whole trade-off between the cost of inaccuracy and the cost of generating the forecast, right? That's something that's been known since 1971. There was a Harvard Business Review article on how do you balance the cost of too much time generating a forecast versus the accuracy I'm getting. In colloquialism, is the juice worth the squeeze? I think based on those numbers that I create, I mentioned before, for a reasonably sized company, there's a lot of benefit there. And I can afford to have, some people look at that. I don't think collaborative forecasting is bureaucratic. I think you need to involve those people with a process that they can create value add through. Yeah, we can start to systematize these inputs. That's great. I think there are always going to be events happening. Supply chains are not getting any less complex. They're getting more complex, more dynamic, more of the butterfly effect. And so because of that, we need people to be able to contextualize that information and make a best decision at the time period that we need to make that decision, right? So from that perspective, I think it has to be collaborative, because if I'm collaborative and I'm working together and I'm always working with sales and marketing, and it becomes, I'm not boiling the ocean. I'm looking for what's changed, right? If I continue to do that, I've got that relationship. I am able to then get those inputs and have a better relationship with them. The opposite is that I have an ad hoc process where I involve sales and marketing kind of at my discretion when I want to. I pretty much guarantee the quality of your inputs from sales and marketing are going to be significantly decreased if they're not part of a regularly scheduled process. What I got from salespeople all the time is like, I'm too busy selling, like, leave me alone, right? So if you want to get that input, I think you have to involve them in the process. You mentioned about the disconnect with actual business value. You can't make bad decisions with good data, or you can't make good decisions with bad data. So the argument is, yeah, I need that better forecast. There is no argument for a decrease in forecast accuracy, right? So I need to make sure, that I'm using the best data I can for decision. Will that be tied directly to an ROI? Can I calculate the ROI of one decision in isolation for an entire supply chain? It's not going to happen, right? I would love to say it is, but my decision from a forecasting standpoint is completely separate from the functional, decisions that manufacturing makes, purchasing makes, warehousing, transportation. Any of those things can lead to a poor ROI, right? And so my role is to be as accurate as possible.
10 seconds, Jeff.
Thank you. All right, I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Sorry for speaking right over the end there, but I did have to just remind you. Sorry.
No worries.
At this point, thank you, Jeff. I will turn to Joannes. Please, your concluding remarks. 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of the debate was, is FVA best practice or time waster? Throughout this debate, you've heard a lot of information, but please carry a few things in mind when deciding what you think about FVA. Number one, if you use FVA as part of an ongoing collaborative process, collaborative forecasting process, understood as micromanaging the forecasting points, that is not best practice. Manual override of the forecast is, without question, not best practice in the forecasting community, and as such, measuring them with FVA is not best practice either. Number two, FVA is built on time series forecast, and I'm sure somebody somewhere is trying to apply it to probabilistic forecast, but let's be real, FVA only works at scale if it works at all, in combination with classic time series forecasts, which are completely disregarding uncertainty. And these are not best practice, and thus measuring their accuracy with FVA is also not best practice. Number three, by design, FVA assume that increased accuracy is something that is worth having. And this is not, again, this is really not the case. Contrary to what was said, there are cases where increasing accuracy can actually hurt your business. If we have a very simple example, for sparse series, forecasting 0 is very frequently the most accurate forecast, even forecasting 0 demand, even if it makes no sense. Thus, even if you disagree with me with all those elements of forecasting and supply chain, this much is abundantly clear. FVA, for all these reasons and more, cannot be considered a best practice. And if it is a very sad indictment of the forecasting community.
Thank you very much, Joannes. And Jeff, I turn to you. Your concluding remarks, please. 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Again, as I started off, better planning leads to better decisions. We have to learn how to plan. We have to learn how to replan. We need to make sure that we have an accurate forecast going in there. I don't think there is a good business case that poor data will always, will lead to better decisions, right? If you have poor data and make good decisions, I'm calling that blind luck. That doesn't happen very often, right? Where FVA shines, again, I'm not just advocating micromanaging. I'm not advocating overriding everything. There are examples where we have items that are high value, have high error. We know that there are external events that could happen that can't be reduced, to a neat algorithmic input, right? We need to understand those. We need to plan for those on the time horizon that's necessary to make those decisions. So any critique on FVA is largely based on a misunderstanding of what FVA is designed to do. I know Lokad, you sell software packages. In prior work, I have, been at a software company, and I've also implemented software packages. I know that the tool works. Oftentimes it's the problem with implementation. If the customer's not getting what they want, it's an implementation issue 9 times out of 10, implementation and a data issue, right? And so any critique on FVA stems from you don't know how to implement it correctly. You don't understand how this operates and how this adds value. I'll give you another simple analogy. If I'm building a deck on the back of my house, and I heard that, hey, I ought to screw the boards into the joists, and I use a hammer to start hammering in wood screws, it's not going to work, and I'm not going to be happy. That doesn't mean there's a problem with the hammer. It means I just don't know how to use the hammer properly. I'm using the wrong tool for the job. Okay, thank you.
Sorry to cut you off, but I do have to be strict with the times to maintain impartiality. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Gentlemen, thank you both for clearly your prepared remarks and your argumentation and your passion. At this point, I'd like to transition to a few follow-up questions. There were some coming through. I took some notes based on things that were said. So before we transition to the audience questions, just specifically, because I'm sitting here, I'm listening, and I want to kind of clarify a couple of points that were raised. I shall start with, I think, actually I'll push Joannes, just to show impartiality, I'll push Joannes. So Jeff, in your rebuttal, you mentioned the aphorism simpler is better. I think you mentioned the M5 results, and you made the point that just because something is sophisticated or bleeding edge, that doesn't necessarily make it better. So Joannes, your response to the concept there that basically, if I can just unpack that a little bit, that probabilistic forecasting, pure algorithmic modeling, that's just too fancy. We should be simple.
The reality is that we won at the skill level the M5 competition with a model that is parametric and that has like 5 parameters. That's it. So yes, again, algorithmic doesn't mean better. And in fact, Tetlock in his book Super Forecasting showed that a moving average will beat 99% of the humans at forecasting anything. Humans see patterns everywhere. They have an immense, that's a cognitive problem. It's extremely difficult to deal with noise. So you see patterns everywhere, and this is just bad for forecasting. And by the way, that's something where kind of artificial intelligence, like moving average, actually beats human mind the vast majority of the time. So that was just the point. And in particular, the probabilistic forecasting algorithm of Lokad are not necessarily very fancy. They just have like a strange shape, but they're not super fancy in the sense of using deep learning and whatnot.
Jeff, how does that sound to you? Is there anything you wish to push him back on there?
The only challenge I would have, and I'm all for bringing in the latest data, the latest technologies. Again, was at a software company, we were selling technology. So my challenge is that sometimes we don't need to overcomplicate things, and maybe it is better. But we need to make sure that we're getting that incremental value for anything that we do. And also with that, the explainability is also, again, critical. Like for us, us here in the room, people that are interested in watching this, yeah, we're all into the probabilistic forecasting and the data and stuff like that. When we get to the implementation, like if I am trying to sell what the stat for or whatever algorithmic forecast, if it suffers from explainability issues, that's when we can start to get some pushback, because humans naturally have some algorithm aversion, right? And so they're going to push back on things they don't understand. A lot of these forecasting techniques, the simpler ones, are relatively easy to explain, and that's where I'm saying sometimes the simpler ones from a performance standpoint work just as well. Again, simple ensemble forecast beat 92% of the people that were fighting for fame and fortune and money in the M5 competition, right? So there's a certain value in that. I would also say you don't want to overtax any individual organization. right? Some organizations have a maturity level, and we need to bring them up that maturity level. For many of them, a huge number of them, yeah, if I can get them to do, exponential smoothing forecasts, great. Ensembles, great. Talk about, what the prediction intervals are, fantastic. To them, no problem with the fancier, more sophisticated algorithms. We just need to make sure we bring them up based on their ability to digest and accept that technology. Otherwise, we run the risk. And I've had that problem before. Perfectly, I used to make mixed interlinear programs for companies, and if they didn't understand it, they wouldn't accept it, right? And so that's my watch out as we try to push the more sophisticated algorithms.
Joannes, anything to add there?
Again, I think, I think there is slightly a disconnect, because what I'm saying is that first, Lokad, when we, for example, do probabilistic forecasting, the methods themselves are quite simple. And any sophistication there is, it is only the sophistication to precisely take into account the factors. As I said, our alternative to FVA is to say that when people have information and raise a hand, that's going to be factors to be included. And so the forecast itself is just going to use this extra information as an input, not as an override to the output. And it has plenty of I would say, very positive consequences, such as if you refresh the forecast, then people don't have to refresh the override. Because the problem is that people think of it as an override, as something that is static. But okay, you override the forecast, but what if next week there is an information and your baseline has just moved? What do you do? Do you reapply the same override, the same delta compared to what you had before? I mean, there are tons of complications that just result from the fact that the marketing provides an information that is in the form of a forecast override. It is much saner to say, marketing tell us we are going to promote this product with an ad spending of this much, and then you factor that as an input to your forecast. And then you can even backtest if it's I would say, accuracy or not. And this backtest, unlike FVA, is something that you can get on the spot. You don't even need to actually wait for 3 months to see if your manual correction yielded something positive or not.
If I can just butt in for just a moment there, because Joannes, you touched on something that I did want to say to Jeff as well. Again, with regards to the simpler is better, building on what you just said, would it not theoretically be simpler for an expert to interview other experts, just different domain experts, elicit insights, and then take them and translate them into an algorithmic decision, versus everyone, including non-experts, touching a forecast? Like, in terms of simplicity, what are your thoughts there? Are they equally simple, or is one more complex than the other?
Typically, where I have used FVA has been in sales operations planning process, demand review, looking at the time horizon that's 3 months out. So we've got current month plus 1, 2. Typically, a lot of CPG companies, a lot of companies, that's kind of the frozen schedule. That's frozen or slushy, but that's where you start to transition between the planning and the execution. So it's S&op versus S&OE, right? When we are in that S&op domain, we are looking at some of these, the events, some of the drivers. What we do there is, if we're doing it at an aggregate level, that's where we're gathering inputs. Right. And so if it's input at a product family level, whatever S&op family you use, then you can use those high level drivers to kind of propagate down. So you can disaggregate some of those decisions, which is a common practice, is to take a high level number, disaggregate it down to the details. On the executional side, if there was a significant event that happened, right, then yes, you could also do that at a family level. You could do it at a company level, depending on the size of that impact, right? I think that's easier. I don't necessarily advocate adjusting each and every SKU, because I think, as you mentioned earlier, yes, that can be burdensome. But if there are huge impacts, we need to make those adjustments. So in that planning, in that replanning, again, going back to the plan is nothing, planning is everything. That notion of we're replanning, we're revisiting. If we do that in S&OP process, we do that once a month. We've got all the decision makers in the room. We do it once a month. And we also start to focus on the fact of like, well, what's already in the model? What's new information? How do we incorporate that new information? In fact, one of the times I almost stood up and cheered during a demand review meeting was when the sales leader, the VP, was in the room, and he goes, okay, what new information do we know about this? And no new information. He's like, okay, the stat forecast, the algorithm forecast stands, and that was it, right? So there wasn't a lot of bureaucracy in that. So I think that's the ideal way to do it, unless there are some like really big events that we know about. But then if you are the supply chain scientist in your verbiage, you have to then proactively go out and seek that inputs. Whereas, from the way I'm suggesting it, sales and marketing come to the meetings knowing that they have to tell me, hey, what's net new, what's changed, what wasn't in last month's assumptions. So we try to make that as quick as possible. But, for a large, CPG firm, you can go through that pretty quickly at a family level.
Thank you, Jeff. Joannes, anything to add?
I mean, not too much, but to keep it concise, the reason why we really advocate having the expert taking the information instead of having the forecast being tweaked is that almost invariably the information mismatch in terms of granularity the business of the company. So we have this competitor who is getting bankrupt. Okay. There is no clear overlap between this competitor and exactly what he's doing. So it's not like a one-to-one. There is an extensive problem of, okay, category by category, which are the products being impacted. So you see, it's the idea that an information can come in the head of a person from sales or marketing or whatever as, okay, this information can find a matching time series to override is almost never the case. It is just finding what is relevant to touch is difficult. And what about all the other sources of uncertainty? Because when Lokad, we operate a company with predictive models, we have easily half a dozen of predictive models. One for the demand, yes, but also the lead times, production yields, future price of suppliers, anticipation of volatility of price of competitors, etc., etc. So it is, when you say, the problem with FVA is that it also, you see, not only it has this problem of impedance mismatch between the granularity of the information that you have and the time series, but also it just puts demand on a pedestal while you can have tons of other uncertainties that need to be forecast, and that where there is also information such as, okay, this supplier is getting completely overwhelmed, lead times are just going to explode. That should be reflected in the lead time forecasting algorithm.
Yeah, I'm saying I've got no argument with you there in terms of, yeah, there are other things that we need to look at supply chain, and in no way, shape, or form am I recommending that, hey guys, focus on FVA, forget about looking at supplier lead times or anything like that. That's not correct. So, we need to focus on what the demand is. Again, what is, from an efficient standpoint, what is my best demand, right? And I also need to know all those other things about my supply side too. Like we need to do both of those, right? And yes, totally in agreement. We need lead time variation. We need to understand manufacturing when they could be down with supplier pricing. We need to know that as well. So I've got no argument with there. The only argument I have is I am not saying focus on FVA to the exclusion of those other things.
Okay. Well, again, we do have other questions from the audience that I will get to. There's just one last point that was raised, and I will pose it. I'll first try to paraphrase fairly, Jeff, so just confirm if I paraphrase fairly, but then I want to press you, Joannes, on it. Jeff, I think it was in your concluding remarks, you made the claim that there exist items that cannot be reduced to an algorithm. Is that a fair summation of what you said? There exist certain items, I think it was low forecastability, that you can't simply depend on an algorithmic solution to provide.
Well, and there are events. It's more related to events being, non-repeatable.
And the implication there being that do require manual override, manual input.
yeah, some contextualization of the fact that there is an event. I don't have anything I can model it with, but I'm going to have to make a decision. I'm going to use an expert to help me out on that.
Okay, Joannes, your thoughts on that? Because I was very curious listening to that to get your take.
So that's here where I was mentioning the expert Philip Tetlock, in my argumentation, and he actually wrote a book called Super Forecasting, and he assessed human forecasting capabilities with a project that has been running for a decade called the Good Judgment Project, and it was funded by DARPA, the intelligence equivalent of the US DARPA. And what they found was that actually the people who were good forecasters for this kind of intuitive, way to forecast things, for things where you don't have like an algorithmic recipe. So again, their immediate conclusion was when there is an algorithmic recipe available, it's better. When there is none, okay, back to humans and high-level judgments. But what they conclude, and that's one of the conclusions of the book, is that the super forecasters, so people who achieve consistently superior forecasting accuracy, are in fact building micro algorithm tailored to the case. That's literally, and when people are able to do that, they have like a massive improvement in accuracy. The order of magnitude is we're talking of a 30% accuracy increase, even on things that are like super difficult to assess, like for example, would the former president of Syria get back in power in Syria in the next 5 years? Just like a question that is like super, very, very difficult to answer. So the bottom line is, if we go back to those conclusions, it again support the idea that when there is information, it's not the person who has the information that needs to be the person who translates this information into a quantitative statement about the forecast of the company. That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think where FVA kind of, and the practice of those manual overrides get it wrong is that the way at Lokad we approach that is that somebody gives us the information, the raw information, and then if we have an item that is sitting out of nowhere, then we need to invent kind of a mini numerical recipe that convert that to a number. And the interesting thing is that you not only have to do it, to invent it, but you have to document it. You have to explain what was the logic, even if it's like 3 sentences that just say, okay, I do this, multiply this by this, apply a ratio and a discount, something very, dumb and heuristic, like cooking recipe. Mm-hmm. Again, if we go back to super forecasting, this book, it is exactly how the super forecaster, people who achieve without algorithms superior forecasting results, is that they have the explicit the numerical recipe, which makes their process improvable. So it's not just information. You need to have a process that is repeatable and improvable on the way on. How do you convert those insights into numbers? And that should not be like magic in the mind of the people.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, we have people document, what your assumptions are, and an extension of that. Yes, if you could have, some large language model, AI for the sales team or for the marketing, fantastic, because that is one of the biases. You ask people, you try to get their inputs, and sometimes they remember stuff, sometimes they don't remember stuff. A lot of times we're going back through the data going, okay, when did we do that price increase? Oh, we're coming up on a year. Maybe that, the first bump we hit from the pricing increases died off by then. I'm all in favor of automating that if you can. You need to have that conversation with the people and start getting that. It has to be a way of life for them, because there are so many of those cases right now, right, in a lot of companies. So I think, yeah, you start down that road.
All right. Well, at this point, I will push forward to some of the questions that have come in from the audience. So I think I asked you first last. This is for both of you, but I'll go to Jeff, you first. This is from Nicholas. How can one manage a situation where too much information is coming in, forcing statistical models to change frequently, even with an SIOP, not S&op, SIOP in place? How can the pressure from marketing and finance teams be balanced effectively?
So the question is, if there is a lot of different information coming from sales and marketing?
Yeah, basically, if there's a wave of information coming in, how do you handle that, especially if it's forcing the statistical models to change quite frequently with, let's say, lots of overrides, for example? Though I added that parentheses myself.
Okay, so the statistical model itself wouldn't be changed. So we're talking about a stat forecast model based on time series and then overrides from sales and marketing is what I take it to be. We're not
Let's
talking
just
about
presume so. I don't have Nicholas with me right now, sorry.
Okay. So, I mean, in that case, you need to make a decision at the time horizon, right? And so if I need to make it 3 months out, it's in order to set my manufacturing schedule, my run sequencing for my finite capacity scheduling, then yeah, we need to have the practice of, don't come in at the last minute with new information. One of the other things from a manufacturing side, what I'm a huge advocate for is frozen time fence violations, to train the salespeople. Hey, surprises in, current month and current month plus one, they are not welcome. And that's a cultural thing, right? And that's how I would address that. I mean, I had one instance where this, a salesperson came in and said, "Hey, we got this big, huge sale," and they waited till the last minute to tell manufacturers, like, that's not a good deal, right? You've just cost us, probably quite a bit of money. So that idea of frozen, you need to make the call on that time frame. That has to be your best call, and realize we're going to plan based on that, and don't surprise us. And that's how I would deal with a wave like that. In fact, one of the S&op metrics that I love is that frozen time fence violation. It's like, how often are we whip chaining, our manufacturing folks just because, you waited to the last minute to tell us there's a new sale.
Thank you, Jeff. Joannes, any thoughts there? Also, feel free to fold in to your answer. Again, how would an expert under your rubric, how would an individual or small team of experts handle a lot of sudden insights from a lot of different people?
So that's the whole point. First, the approach of Lokad is that we automate everything. So for us, that's the sort of situation where most of the time, I would say, first you need to have bandwidth for that. And you see, that's the interesting thing about automating everything is that by definition, the supply chain scientist has, once the thing is automated, a lot of bandwidth to actually take in an exceptional situation. That is typically not the case in a situation where people have already all their time already eaten to deal with the routine. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the instability of forecasting is it's a characteristic of classic time series forecast, point forecast. So you add a little bit of information and the thing will just jump up and down because according to your accuracy metric, this is what you should do to be super reactive, to be most accurate. As soon as very frequently, you have this trade-off of if you want to be quite accurate, you need to capture, change very rapidly, and that makes the forecast very jumpy. Here, that's where if you go for probabilistic forecasting, it tends to eliminate the sort of problems of jumpiness because suddenly, you already had a probability distribution that was kind of diffuse, So the fact that you observed, an outlier and whatnot, you still have this diffuse probability distribution. There is no major jump in the mass, in the spread of the mass of the probability distribution. Then also, the problem of jumpiness of the forecast, even if we go for probabilistic forecast, which can be radically altered, is, as I said, why does people, I would say, dislike jump in the forecast? The answer is that because forecasts are manually processed. Again, manual overrides, manual revisit, and whatnot. This is not how Lokad do it. The forecast is automated. The decisions are automated. So when the forecast moves, decisions automatically, immediately reflect whatever is a new state, taking into account the fact that you might be financially committed to a certain course of action. So you see, yes, the demand has changed, but you've already produced the inventory. So now, even if the demand is not what you expected to be, you still have to liquidate, sell this inventory somehow. So that you see that automation, it's just that the automation streamline, and that largely remove the problems of putting a tempo on when the information is added. The information can be added whenever it becomes available. And as soon as it becomes available, it is taken into account, which I believe Jeff was speaking about culture. that's the interesting thing, is that it reward immediately people for bringing the information, because at literally the day they add their information is validated, okay, fine. The next day, production schedules are all steered, production schedules, inventory allocation, dispatch, purchase orders, everything is immediately reflecting this information that has been provided just yesterday. So for people, you see, a way to develop a culture of bringing the information forward was also they have to see that when they bring in information, literally within almost hours, it is reflected at every scale in every single decision. That's how you can make it, very tangible. Not by telling them, come back next month, and then we will start looking at your stuff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I definitely want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
that last
for
part,
sure.
because I could see it in your face. It was resonating at least a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that sounds like a recipe for a bullwhip effect, right? You're saying that any little bit of information I'm going to throw in there, I appreciate the responsiveness and the technical capability to immediately reflect what the best decision is. The challenge lies in, we've already made a lot of those decisions. If I've done my scheduling, and let's say I'm going from, let's say I'm making oatmeal, and I've got regular oatmeal, and then I've got oatmeal with cinnamon, then I've got cinnamon and apple, and then I make cinnamon apple and walnut. Well, I've got an allergen. Now there's a huge changeover cost between that. Now, if you're jumping in and I have to disrupt that schedule immediately, there's a huge financial cost, a potential financial cost to that. If all of a sudden I need to order more of a raw material more quickly, I'm going to have a bullwhip on my supplier, right? So there are some advantages to stability. In fact, there's a lot of interesting conversation going on about, is there a valuable and stable forecast? Not the most accurate, but a accurate plus stable, because stability does have some benefits in supply chain. So that's an area we're just starting to do research in, but it speaks to the fact that many of these decisions have to be made, and we've kind of planted a stake in the ground. And everyone will laugh when I say, a frozen forecast. Like, man, it's not really frozen. Like, okay, we all know it's not frozen, but there's a financial consequence to making changes in decisions. So that's, while technically I think it's great that we can reflect, hey, now this is now the best decision. I think we need to temper that with the fact that if we change based on everything that comes in, there are going to be some costs associated with it. That might be perfectly fine for some supply chains. If I've got a responsive supply chain, that maybe we're fine. Maybe that's the world we live in. If we have an efficient supply chain, where changes are expensive and difficult to make, that's where I see an issue.
But
so I'll temper that with a
really
definition.
understand. I mean, at Lokad, obviously modeling the cost of change is obvious. That's obviously something, every resource allocation, if it's deviate from what was the previous, we model that in the cost. It's like super basic. So the thing is not going to jump if the cost of change exceeds, the anticipated benefits. Okay. So you see, for me, it's like, again, I think people usually approach looking at extremely, I would say, nonsensical numerical recipe and say, oh, look, this is a problem. Like, for example, we have a decision that is like super naively slave to a forecast. No consideration whatsoever with the current commitment, etc. It is incredibly naive. Obviously, you need part of your numerical recipe to have the decision that implement whatever cost of change and all sorts of costs. There are plenty of and that's where probabilistic forecasting also shines, is that it gives you also you do even factor the fact that if you take this decision now, will you have to revise it in the future? Because again, if you have the point forecast, by definition, you assume that you already know the future. So your model prevents you from considering automatically that your forecast might be wrong. But with probabilistic forecast, it is a given. The forecasts already tell you that no, that's demand can be anywhere from on this range, or you have the probabilities. And so not only you will compute when you optimize the decision the cost of change, if there is any change, but also the fact that change might be needed in the future.
Well, gentlemen, again, I am mindful of time, and there's still at least 4 more questions to get through. Okay. So, but in the spirit of parity, I will pose this next one to you, Jeff. So would FVA be a good approach to help ease the pressure to adjust statistical models to meet budget expectations? Second part, how can a supply chain data scientist... Oh, wait, sorry, I should actually pose this. Forgive me. I should actually pose this to Joannes. Sorry. Would a FVA be a good approach to help ease the pressure to adjust statistical models to meet budget expectations? And how can a supply chain data scientist navigate the politics and hierarchy when faced with such challenges? And Jeff, I will come to you for a comment.
Again, that's the problem with point forecast. Point forecast assumes that you know the future. So if you know the future, everything, the plan, everything is a matter of orchestration. And your forecast tell you the budget that you need for everything. And that's wrong because first, the forecast has inaccuracies. And you're completely dismissing on the uncertainty. You see, a point forecast is rigidly attached to a given budget. That's absolutely, again, which is not best practice, but if we go to the world of probabilistic forecast, then suddenly all those problems go away. What you have is possible futures, and then all the budget spending can be considered. You know, if you tell me you have this amount of resource, then you will look how to allocate those resources to make the most according to those probabilities on the future. So you see, and by the way, we have an example of that. If people want to have a spreadsheet, they can look at prioritized inventory replenishment on our website. It's an Excel spreadsheet that demonstrates that with a probabilistic forecast, you can pick whatever budget you have, and it will give you the best you can get for your budget. So you see, again, that's a problem of point forecasts are defective as a paradigm. So classic time series are defective as a paradigm, and you end up with a lot of problems that you would not have, you know, even conceptually, if you were not attached to a defective paradigm.
Jeff, your comment there?
Just one kind of off the cuff about, a defective paradigm. That defective paradigm has been working really well for a lot of companies for dozens and dozens of years. So I wouldn't classify it as defective. Now, with respect to, the budget, the forecast and the budget, a huge problem because budgets are aspirational, right? The best thing that we can do, and again, this is from a sales and operations standpoint, I always have my clients forecast out 18 months. So guess what? Mid 2025, we've already started to look at 26. We can understand what the most likely view of 2026 is going to be. Then from there, you can layer on your aspirational goals on top of it. No problem with that. But then you force the conversation, well, what would have to happen for us to increase our sales by this much, to decrease our costs by that much, right? That's part of the conversation. So the best way to do that is, one, base your budget on a solid statistical forecast or whatever consensus forecast that you've got for the future. Base your budget on that. Then if you've got deviations from that, also have sales, marketing, manufacturing plans to shore up those gaps. Worst practice, hope everyone agrees with that, is ivory tower. This is what our budget is. Finance puts plugs in. It reminds me of the old calculus problems where, the derivation is left to the user, and we're like, oh, how the heck are we going to do that, right? So that's a worst practice, just putting those plugs in there. So that, I think, is a way to make sure your original budget is based in reality with plans to get there. Then the second thing I'm saying, FVA is perfect for that. Hey, this is what our stat forecast is. The budget, there is no FVA to budget, right? That's aspirational, right? But you point out where those gaps are and force that conversation how to address it. Yes, I think all of us would agree. Another absolute worst practice is that the forecast equals the budget. That would drive me crazy.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I will push on to the next comment, or the next question, excuse me. And this one is directly to Joannes. This is from Timur, I believe. I find FVA useful, but sometimes limited in scope. Would you agree with Jeff's metaphor of FVA being like a hammer, or do you see it differently?
Yes. I'm not too sure. My criticism is of FVA is really not that it is a hammer, or it's really that I believe it operates within the wrong paradigms. It is strange, and due to the wrong paradigms, again, time series, classic point forecast, the fact that it's rooted in accuracy and not measurements in percentage of error, not dollars of error. So you see, there is plenty of paradigmatic problems, and that's why I say those things are defective. I stand by my point on this front, and also the sort of frictions that companies endure in practice are more like the manifestation of all those problems. And if we want a piece of anecdotal evidence that those paradigms are defective, is that since the 1970s, the supply chain theory, was promising complete automation of those decision-making, processes. And that was, by the way, the pitch by Oracle right from the 70s. You will get completely algorithmically driven inventory management. This did not happen. And it failed again and again and again. And the point that I'm making is, I believe, and but I have also a lot of supporting argument, is that it reflects the fact that the paradigms, the mathematical tools, the instruments are just wrong. And so you end up with all sorts of weird issues. And that's where, to cycle back on this hammer thing, yes, I mean, it feels sometimes like a hammer to screw.
Mm-hmm. Trying to use a hammer to tighten nails?
Yes. And that doesn't work. You see, it's the wrong paradigm. So that's not that the hammer is bad in itself, is that you're trying to do something for which the hammer is not the right tool.
Jeff, I will give you space there for a comment if there's anything you wish to add.
No, other than the fact, the analogy, that I made about the hammer was like, you have to use the tool correctly. So FVA is a tool. If you're not using the tool correctly, you're not going to get value out of it. That was my analogy.
Well, thank you. I'll push on. This is from Marina. There's no clear designation of who this is for, so I will go to Jeff first. With AI rapidly advancing and the possibility of having all data available in the near future, do you think FVA will become more effective or even more essential?
More effective or more? That's an interesting question. What I think as AI starts to become more and more prevalent, more and more data, I think we have to learn how to contextualize that and make decisions with it. Mm-hmm. You could almost envision a case far down in the future where we're able to contextualize all this information, large language models, put it in there, and to your point, Joannes, actually start to systematize that stuff. I mean, that is potentially something that would lead to FVAs like, well, okay, we're making all of these decisions, and they're great decisions, right? And maybe then you're left with like very, very edge cases of significant events, but maybe things like a competitor going out of business, or doing a promotion at the same time where there's a downturn in the economy, at the same time there's an increase in your seasonality. Yeah, you might be able to start to get those. So I think there's probably going to be some low-hanging fruit where AI is going to be fantastic at taking all that data, understanding relationships, also understanding the noise that exists and what's valuable, what's not valuable. So I could see it potentially even being a little bit less valuable in the future as we do start to automate it.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Joannes, AI, FVA, the future, yes, no, good, bad?
I think, again, we have to step back on the artificial intelligence. Let's consider that in terms of mass of information, transactional systems holds gigabytes worth of information. I mean, giga Shannons, if you want to be really, really fancy. So the transactional data is gigabytes of information. The people, in comparison, is kilobytes of information. What people have on their head is not a huge amount of information. People are not like they are not mentas, as I would say in Dune series for the people who like that. So that means that first 99% of the problem of getting those correct decisions is about, first, in terms of mass of information, taking the information, mundane transactional information that you have, and generating the decisions out of that. That's 99% of the bulk of the information. Here, I mean, here I am not for this part of the problem, which is process numerical data found in tabular forms. I do not see the large language models being very, very relevant. I mean, yes, they can be very effective coding tools so that you can actually use the tool to write the code for you. So that's one thing, but can they do more than or do other things that write the code? It becomes very, very unclear. Now, for the kilobytes of information that people have in the head, can they actually use to take this information and just convert it into bridging the gap towards something that would be quantitative? I would say yes, but the challenge is still engineering this thing, end-to-end, this pipeline to have this automated predictive optimization, and that is a real challenge. And here, I would say we are stressing the limits of human intelligence to do it right. So I do not see in the short future that the AI that we have are really able to do that any more than, let's say, an AI company replacing Microsoft by having an AI rewriting a version of Microsoft Word. It's the sort of things where you can have the AI can help you to write the code, but it will still require a lot of, I would say, human intelligence supervision, at least with the current paradigm that we have with LLMs. They are not super intelligent yet.
Well, there are still 2 questions to go. So, Jeff, if you want, we can just push straight to the next one. Perfect, yep. Thank you. This one is for you. I will go first. This is from Mark, how can forecast confidence intervals be effectively translated into a single discrete number, such as a purchase or work order? Would post-forecast analysis be the best approach to determine that number?
Yeah, so I have no problems with probabilistic forecasting or the intervals, but at the end of the day, you need to put a number into your ERP system, into your scheduling system. You need to make a choice on the number. Now, where the interesting conversation becomes is, what is the variation in that number? Is my system robust? What happens if it was up 20%, 30%, whatever? But those become scenarios that you can start to investigate. Right. So yeah, that would be my response.
Thank you. Joannes, anything you wish to add there?
Yes. Again, if we are rebounds, if you think that if you approach the problem from a paradigmatic perspective, we say I have to make a decision. This decision of inventory quantity is a number, and thus the forecast must be a number. Then you have this problem: is that uncertainty do not exist. It cannot exist. And that's why people, again, we are going back to this incorrect perspective, is that people are approaching the problem and say, what about those confidence intervals? What do I do with them? Oh, I need to think a number. And that's a paradigmatic trap. You're trapped into concepts that are defective. And so because you approach that, you're approaching the problem with the current paradigm, with a demand forecast will, as a consequence, give you a straight, as a number, inventory decision. If you start, but the only way to solve it is, again, the probabilistic forecast is not about replacing those classical forecasts and just pretending everything is the same. No. You preserve, even in the decision, the fact that the decision reflects all the possible scenarios. It's not you pick a number for the inventory, you've picked a specific demand. No, your inventory decision just reflect all the possible scenarios with the priorities and expressing the various risk in monetary terms. So that's why it's a different way to think about it. And back to the question, it is why if you stay in the sort of time series paradigm, you don't know what to do with your confidence intervals. They don't fit in the system.
I would argue that you do know exactly what to do with these confidence intervals, because if I've got the forecast error at my lead time, that goes into my safety stock calculation. Now, whether you agree with that or not, there are very well-defined safety stock calculations to take in demand variability, lead time variability. So if we take that, now we have, and again, I will, I don't want to blow this up and go sideways into in inventory management theory.
Joannes loves safety stocks.
there are statistical safety stock calculations that are perfectly happy taking a point forecast along with a standard error of your forecast at the lead time and giving you a safety stock number. And we can argue all day about what the distribution of that looks like and if a normal distribution is the proper one, but that is how that deviation in forecast error is addressed in a majority of the companies that I have worked for and a majority of the companies I've heard present at conferences.
I will push through to the last question. How should, I'll go to Jeff first and then Joannes. How should machine learning models handle adjustments for known, actually I'll go to Joannes first and then Jeff, excuse me. How should machine learning models handle adjustments for known events such as a large new customer that are not included in the causal factors of the statistical forecast?
So again, here we are touching the problem of dealing with an information where you don't have a clear algorithmic structure. And you can't invoke machine learning as, a buzzword to say, oh, the tech is going to, do something for me here. Here we are entering the territory of, I would say, informal forecasting. And that's exactly for the audience. I really recommend the book of Philip Tetlock called Super Forecasting. This is if you do not have clear, I would say, a clear baseline, what do you do? And machine learning provides no answer to this question. Machine learning, at least the classic machine learning paradigm, which is supervised learning, input, output, do not provide an answer to this question at all. I do believe that it is, if you read what, again, this Good Judgment project, what has been done, and the sort of techniques they have developed techniques, but they are invariably techniques of higher intelligence. And so what I mean by higher intelligence is that it's to apply these techniques, we are looking at something that is, exhibiting the same sort of fuzzy intelligence like an LLM or above. And it is really the techniques boils down. I'm not going to summarize the whole book they have identified because they were talking with super forecasters, people who have pioneered and demonstrated superior forecasting skills in this sort of situation. And they looked at what sort of techniques all those people had in common. And surprisingly, they all came up with kind of the same set of techniques. So long story short is that there are techniques, but they require, but they require a lot of judgments. And based on those empirical results, I do not think that if you have such a situation, you can get away with, a machine learning algorithm. Effectively, you need to build a case, a little bit like a business case in business, where you have to engineer your own assumptions, to decompose the case, assess the various factors, and try to come up with something that is reasonable. But the problem is that I'm using words like reasonable. What does that mean formally? It's very, very difficult. And yet, people can actually look at a rational and agree at that. So my take on that would be, if I go back to the answer, would be do not expect that classic machine learning will be an answer. LLM would maybe be a supporting tool to help you, build this sort of reasoning, certainly to brainstorm on how to even decompose and sort of quantify the various factors in the problem. But then it would, I would say, at the end of the day, it would be a forecasting expert who really look at that and make a judgment call on the ad hoc numerical modelization. That would be the best practice, at least based on those empirical studies from the Good Judgment project.
Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be careful with too much of this, whether it's machine learning, whether it's AI, throwing too much stuff in it, right? Because then we might start to confuse, correlation with causation. One of the classical learning experiences I had during one of my classes was a multiple regression model. We kept throwing factors, fit got better. We threw in price, and all of a sudden, guess what? If I increase the price, I'm going to increase the sales, right? Totally counterintuitive. Causal was obviously off, but the correlation was better. So we need to be really, really careful with that, because at some point we begin to model noise. We begin to ask, whether it's machine learning or AI or whatever, we begin to ask it questions. The problem is, with AI, that'll that'll answer it with all the overconfidence of a 5-year-old toddler who believes in the tooth fairy. Like, this is exactly what happens. So we need to be careful. And so that's where I would agree with Joannes. So like, you've got to contextualize that, find an expert who can get that. Don't try to build a perfect model, because at some point your results are not going to be what you anticipate.
Well, at this point, gentlemen, there are no further questions from the audience, but one last question that can serve as a denouement, that can serve as a closing, a curtain call. So, and I'll come to Jeff, I'll come to you first. Again, the topic of the debate was FVA. Is it a best practice or a time waste? Now, you both heard each other for almost 80 minutes. And the reason I want to start with you, Jeff, and ask you, like, how do you feel about that proposition now? Is listening to you make your points and your rebuttals to Joannes, you do seem quite charitable and accepting of several of the points that Joannes is making. And I'm just curious, how does that, like, how can you reconcile that Joannes may be correct on some or all or many of his points? How do you reconcile that with the position that it's FVA still a best practice?
I guess I will get the same question.
You will get the same. It will be slightly inverted. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you're good at forecasting.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I appreciate this this open exchange of ideas, and I think, yes, I can still argue that currently forecast value add is a best practice. We need that in the future. I think Marina asked a great question. In the future, do you see FVA? It's like, as technology advances, it may be less and less of a critical technique. Maybe we can quantify this stuff. Maybe we can start to parameterize things, put it in a model, and make those decisions. I think we are always going to need to have a process where we establish collaboration. We understand sales, marketing, external influence. I think we're always going to have that. Do I see it potentially diminish? Do I see I talked about that high value, high variability quadrant. I can definitely see that being reduced in the future. So yeah, that would be mine. So I'm not, I definitely think that FVA is a best practice and will continue to be a best practice until well past my retirement. Right. So it's in the near future, yes. In the long-term future, I think Joannes has a very nice vision of what the future can hold, and I don't see a lot of problems with that. I think we're 50% aligned on a lot of the ideas.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And Joannes, are you unmoved after all that you've heard? In simple terms, is it unmovable object and unstoppable force, essentially?
I mean, I would say, you see, that's object. If we go back, what I called, the mainstream supply chain theory, and FVA is part of that, is fairly consistent. I granted that, so indeed, if you accept, all these ideas, all those paradigms, and everything, then yes, from this perspective, it doesn't look bad. I would still be a little bit careful with the amount of bureaucratic overhead that you can generate, again, involving a lot of people, is a recipe to consume the time of a lot of people. And as soon as you create some kind of transverse entity, because that would be one, that is going to challenge everybody, that can still create a lot of busy work. And I have examples in my network of people who are doing an immense amount of busy work on these sort of things, especially everything that is like peripheral or supportive of s&op. Now that's the thing, is that Lokad has been operating for more than a decade on different paradigms. There is a whole series of lectures, by the way, Jeff, that I've almost 100 hours worth of YouTube series to back this alternative vision. But the interesting thing is that when you go for, I would say, different paradigms, different tools, different instruments, then the vast majority of those problems just go away. You have new problems, completely different, but still operationally you end up with something that is very strange. It's supply chains where the quasi-totality of the decisions are done automatically. And by the way, we had this experience, which was very strange, with 2020, 2021, where we had dozens of clients where they sent all their white-collar workforce home and we had a client with over €1 billion worth of inventory, where they sent all their workforce home for actually 14 months without access to internet because they wanted to get government subsidies. And their supply chain kept running at like something about 80% of their nominal capacity, with Lokad, taking all the decisions without even the supervision. Normally we are generating the decision, but we have a lot of people who validate that what we are generating is okay. And my take is that, okay, if you can run, multi-billion, hyper-complex, because that was a very complicated supply chains for 14 months without all the people doing this micromanagement, it really begs the question of this added value of all those people, and what should we even expect from automation? And I think people are talking about AI and all sorts of things, but the way I approach is that you don't necessarily need to have like a super fancy hyperparametric trillion big parameters models, to achieve automation. And that would be my concluding, is that I believe that FVA belongs to a world where it's really about people directly piloting the supply chain. And I approach that from a perspective where the machine pilots the supply chain, people pilot the machine, not the supply chain.
Well, thank you. As is customary here, we at Lokad like to give the final word to the guests. So, Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. And if you have any closing comments you wish to make, feel free.
No, just thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate the conversation. Very well moderated, Conor. Thank you very much.
I aim to please.
Appreciated the audience participation and the questions there. So, I think it's always, and I was mentioning this to Conor earlier, it's always interesting when two opposing viewpoints come there, because I think both of them come away a little bit better for the exchange. And quite honestly, I appreciate the opportunity. Pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep. Well, I have nothing further to say, gentlemen. Joannes, thank you very much for your time. Jeff, thank you very much for yours.
Yes.
And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.